letting God speak. That is the great Pastor Rob McCoy. You are so blessed to have Pastor Rob and Pastor Micah. And what we're going to talk about today, I think, is the second most important verse in the Bible. And if you follow this verse, chances are your life is going to turn out a success for the Lord. If you fail to follow this verse, I can almost guarantee you your life is going to be a disaster. Before we do, I want to point out that what we're going to talk about is PG-13. Yeah, it's going to be PG-13 today. I know all the kids are excited now. And what we're going to do is we're going to be correct, not politically correct. Now, you're used to that because Pastor Rob McCoy is correct, not politically correct. And this goes back to 2011. In 2011, I had for about 18 years, I had been doing training for Fortune 500 companies. I was also going to seminary and doing what I'm doing now, but I was kind of running two tracks. I was in corporate America and I was speaking in defense of the Christian faith. And in 2011, I was doing some training for Cisco, the computer people, not the food people, the people that are stationed up there in San Jose, California, where Pastor Rob is today. And I was given a leadership program. At about 2 o'clock one afternoon up there in San Jose, I got a phone call from the guy who hired me, who happened to be an evangelical Christian friend of mine. And he said, Frank, what time's your session over? I said, at 5 p.m. He said, I got to talk to you. I said, well, come on over toward the end. So he did. About 4 o'clock, he came in, sat on the last hour. When the training was over, he came up to me and said, hey, we got to go in the other room. Why? What's going on, Steve? Let's just go in the other room. So we're in another room, and he kind of fumbled around a little bit, and he started to tear up. I'm like, Steve, what's going on? He said, I don't know how to tell you this, but I need to fire you. I said, you need to fire me? For what? He said, well, there was someone in your session who identified as LGBTQ. And that person Googled your name and discovered you wrote a book called Correct, Not Politically Correct. And at that point, the subtitle of the book was How Same-Sex Marriage Hurts Everyone. The updated version is Correct, Not Politically Correct about same-sex marriage and transgenderism. And that person said, since you don't agree with same-sex marriage, you can't work at Cisco. Now, keep in mind, this was actually even before the Supreme Court judicially imposed same-sex marriage on the country in 2015. This is 4 years prior to that. Not that that matters. You can still be against same-sex marriage now, and I hope you can work in corporate America. But in any event, the HR director told me after this guy called the HR director that I needed to fire you, Frank. I'm sorry. So I went home, flew all the way back to Charlotte where I live, and I got to thinking that I need to write the CEO of Cisco a letter. And his name at that point was John Chambers. So I wrote a letter to John Chambers. I FedExed it to him, and I explained what happened. I said, Dear Mr. Chambers, I'm a veteran of the United States Navy. And I know that in 2008, you were on the Elect McCain Commission in California. And I appreciate your support for Senator McCain. And then I explained to him what happened to me at his company. And I said, are you aware that Senator McCain holds the same position on same-sex marriage that I do? Are you qualified to be working at Cisco? So the next day, I got a phone call from an attorney. And the attorney said, what do you want? And I said, I don't want anything other than you call the dogs off other Christians because you claim to be inclusive, tolerant, and diverse. How is it that I was excluded, not tolerated, for holding a diverse view? How does this work? You're all about inclusion, tolerance, and diversity. And he said, well, I will set you up for a meeting with the head of inclusion, tolerance, diversity here at Cisco. I said, okay. Now look, I was a vendor. They could fire me for any reason. I wasn't an employee. So anyway, we set up a meeting via the phone with this lady. Her name happened to be Marilyn Nagel. And I was in Colorado when it happened, and my friend, the late, great Mike Adams, was with me. He was a columnist, and he was on the call as well. We had her on speakerphone. So I asked this lady, Marilyn Nagel, you're the head of inclusion, tolerance, and diversity. How was I fired? How was I not tolerated? How was I not included for holding a diverse view? What does this inclusion, tolerance, and diversity mean? Well, she couldn't answer the question. Because there is no answer to the question. Inclusion, tolerance, and diversity doesn't mean what you think it means. It means that if you don't agree with our values, we will hurt you. Has nothing to do with inclusion, tolerance, and diversity. It's, we've got these values, and if you don't agree with them, you're out. So the call was not going well. At one point, Mike turned to me and he said, there's no point going on with this. Let's just end the call. So I said, thank you, Ms. Nagel. Hung up the phone. I said, Mike, we got to go public with this. We just can't let this go. So Mike wrote the first column. This is in June of 2011, called The Cisco Kid. And then a month later, I wrote a column called Sex at Work. Do not Google that. Do not Google sex at work. It'll take you right to Bill Clinton's website. Okay? This column is actually new in the new edition of the book, but what I'm asking in this column is this. Are we supposed to have sex at work? Why are we talking about sex at work? Why is corporate America obsessed with sex at work? How does talking about sex at work help us be better employees? How does it help us make widgets better or provide services better? It doesn't. It has nothing to do with workplace productivity. So why are we talking about it? Christians, why are you tolerating talk about this at work? What does it have to do with workplace productivity? Does everybody have to agree on sexual practices in order to work at a particular company? That's essentially what they're saying. Now, after we went public, Bank of America, who I was also working for, discovered what had happened, and they did the same thing. In the name of inclusion, tolerance, and diversity. Now, do you know what my real sin was? My real sin was that I didn't agree with how individuals in America are supposed to make decisions. You know how we're supposed to make decisions? We're supposed to follow our hearts. If there's anything ubiquitous in the culture right now, it's all about following your heart. You need to follow your heart, and don't let anyone tell you you're not to follow your heart. You have a right to follow your heart, and you should follow your heart. So what I want to talk about in this session is, should we follow our hearts? And you know when people say you ought to follow your heart, what they're really looking for is hope and identity. And there are three ways to find hope and identity. And by the way, as we go through this, think of any questions you might have, because we'll have a short period of Q&A at the end of this, all right? But there's three ways to find hope and identity. You can look out to other people, you can look into yourself, or you can look up to God. Out to other people, into yourself, or up to God. And in ancient culture, that's what you did. You would look out to other people. You would look out to your family. And in ancient culture, say, if your father was a blacksmith, you were a blacksmith. If your father was a potter, you were a potter. If you were a woman, you just took care of the home. That's the way it was, because you got your cues from outside of yourself, from your family or from your community. But that's ancient culture. Modern culture isn't like that. Modern culture says you don't look out, you look in. You look into your heart. You see what's on your heart. And whatever is on your heart, you pursue that. You cross every stream. You swim every ocean. You climb every mountain. Is that a Disney movie, or is that Sound of Music? Oh, that's Sound of Music. This kind of bilge was being said back in the 1960s. And you don't let anyone tell you that you can't follow your heart. You have a right and an obligation to follow your heart. Now, religious culture says you look up to follow the rules. Now, actually, you might be surprised to learn that religious culture is not Christianity. Christianity is not about following the rules. Christianity is about following the Savior. And if you love the Savior because of what he's done for you, then you will obey his commands. If you love me, you will obey my commands. The goal is not to obey his commands. The goal is to follow him. And as a result, you do obey his commands. You see the difference here? But what I want to zero in on in our time today is modern culture, follow your heart. Now, where does this come from? Well, in modern culture, people think that if you have an idea or a desire on your heart, on your mind, that idea or desire is you. This is why if you were to say, as I was saying in my book, that I think the behavior of same-sex relationships is wrong, it's immoral, it's not productive, it doesn't help people, they think I'm attacking the people that engage in the behavior. No, the behavior is not you. Look, there's a difference between attractions and actions. All of us have attractions we ought not act on. And just because you have an attraction doesn't mean that it has to be an action, that you're obligated to obey whatever your attraction is, because we all have attractions we ought not act on. Now, there's one attraction that still is taboo, and that is the attraction to children, called pedophilia. But have you noticed in recent days, or recent months, maybe recent years, that even the pedophiles are now calling themselves minor attracted people? They're trying to make themselves sound more palatable. That this is just my attraction, so I have to then act on it. No, you don't have to go from attractions to actions. If you don't resist your attractions, you're going to wind up in a very dark place. And by the way, this has even infiltrated the church. This idea that your identity is what you think, or what you believe, or what you feel. And instead of following the Savior, we're following our hearts. We're following what's on our hearts. You know, the new religion in America is more meology than theology. It's whatever I want, that's what God wants. I'm creating God in my image. Now, Pastor Rob said I spent a lot of time presenting evidence for Christianity, and that's true, and that the Bible's true. But you know, there are things in the Bible I don't like. I may even disagree with God over some things. You got a few things you disagree with God over? Okay, I get it. In fact, if your concept of God agrees with you on everything, you probably don't have the true God. If there are things that don't disturb you about God, you're probably not worshiping the true God. If God agrees with you on everything, guess who God is? It's you. So you ought to expect God not to agree with you on some things. But this isn't about meology, this is about theology. So we have to show people that just because they have some sort of idea on their heart, that idea is not them. That needs to be separated, because your identity is not whatever you think about. If your identity was what you thought about, most men would be women and most women would be chocolate. Right? My wife would knock over a store for chocolate. So let's deal with the question, should you follow your heart? Now, here is the second most important verse in the Bible, in my opinion, for today. The most important verse has anything to do with the gospel. But after that, I think this is the most important verse. And it actually comes from the Old Testament. It's a proverb. It's Proverbs 4, verse 23, which says this: above all else, guard your heart, because everything you do flows from it. Notice it doesn't say follow your heart. It says guard your heart. If you don't guard your heart, if you open yourself up to every desire, or every whim, or every impulse that comes across it, I can promise you nothing but pain and suffering the rest of your life. You're going to have to restrain yourself. You're going to have to crucify the flesh. In fact, we're going to give 3 reasons why you can't blindly follow your heart. You can't follow your heart without moral restraint. Oh, there may be some good things God puts on your heart that align with His will. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about all the things that come across your heart that you go, Wow. That doesn't line up with God's will, but I sure want it. Those are the things I'm talking about. And there are 3 reasons that we're going to look at that why you can't follow your heart. Number 1, your heart is corrupt. Your heart tells you it wants something and needs something that you don't really need. Secondly, your heart is conflicting. You have 2 hearts on the same issue. Which heart are you going to follow? And then finally, your heart is changing, and that's particularly true of young people. Your heart can change in a day when you're a young person. And if you tried to follow it one day, the next day you'd be on to something else. You'd be, as James said, you'd be tossed to and fro like a ship on a rough sea. You can't blindly follow whatever comes across your heart. So let's deal with the first one, that our hearts are corrupt. Now, the scriptures talk about this. However, did you know that about 2/3 of Christians believe that human beings are inherently good? If there's anything the scripture gets right, and that's everything, but it certainly gets human nature right. We are not inherently good. It's easy to be bad, it's hard to be good. I mean, anyone who thinks human nature is inherently good has never had a 2-year-old. Do you have to teach a 2-year-old to say mine? No, the 2-year-old already knows mine. You have to teach the 2-year-old to share. You have to continually crucify the flesh. You continually have to mold a young person into a virtuous person because naturally they want to be selfish. It's easy to be selfish. It's hard to be selfless. And the scriptures talk about this. One passage from the Old Testament, one passage from the New I'll give you. From the Old, Jeremiah famously says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it?" I can't understand why things come across my heart sometimes. Can you? But if you blindly follow it, you're going to be in trouble. And Jesus said this. He said, "What comes out of a person is what defiles them, for it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come: sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside and defile a person." We're the problem. Our hearts are corrupt. We want to take shortcuts to get things. In fact, what are the big 3 motivators that motivate us to sin? They're all good things. Sex, money, and power. Those are good things. They're so good, we'll often take shortcuts to get them. And John talks about this in 1 John. He says, "Don't love the world, because all that's in the world is the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the boastful pride of life." Sex, money, and power. Our hearts are corrupted by those things. And if you don't know that and you don't resist that, you're going to wind up in a very dark place. In fact, I can show you, forget the Bible for a second. I can show you through a thought experiment that your heart and my heart is evil. Let's suppose that before you came over here this morning, you went into the bathroom to get ready, and you noticed that there was a sign attached to your head, and this sign communicated every single thought you had in big LED letters. You couldn't turn the sign off. You couldn't cover it. No matter where you went today, everybody could read every thought you had. Question: if that happened to you this morning, would you be here right now? I wouldn't leave the bathroom. Because if you could read my thoughts, I would be embarrassed, and so would you. Because our hearts and our thoughts are evil. I mean, think about when you meet somebody. What are you thinking? You're normally not thinking good thoughts. I mean, the data show that we judge people in the first 4 seconds. You know, and by the way, no extra charge for this. This is why you can't remember names when you meet somebody. Because you're not thinking of the name. You're evaluating people. You're going, "That is the ugliest shirt I've ever seen." Or you're going, "Where'd you get that haircut? Walmart?" That's what you're thinking. And you're thinking, "Do I even want to know this person? How can I get away from this person? How can I what's in it for me?" That's what you're thinking. Because your heart is selfish. Your heart is depraved. Your heart is corrupt. Your heart wants what it wants, and too often you'll hurt other people if you follow that heart to get it. And by the way, the studies all show this is true as well, even though Christians don't believe that people are inherently evil. In fact, the Babylon Bee found this out. That's your best source in fake news. And the reason the Babylon Bee is so funny is because it's true. You ever read a Babylon Bee headline and you're going, is this a real headline? Because it could be. The Babylon Bee found out how evil our hearts was. I don't know if you saw this study. Study finds 100% of men would eat any fruit given to them by a naked woman. You know this is true. You're probably thinking, if I was Adam, I wouldn't have sinned. No, you would have. You'd have done the same thing. Because our hearts are corrupt. They're evil. So the second reason you can't follow your heart is because your heart is conflicting. You have two hearts on the same issue. Like, for example, you might want to be in shape. You might want to eat right, exercise, get the benefits of good health. That's one heart. On the other hand, you might also love glazed donuts, right? You can't follow both hearts. If you go in between, you're going to get neither. You got to follow one or the other. Or, if you're a young person, maybe you're thinking, I want to settle down and have a family. On the other hand, you might think, I still want to be free to play the field. You can't follow both hearts. I don't know about you, but when I got married, it put a big damper on my dating life. You got to follow one heart or the other. You need to sell out to that other person. Otherwise, you're not really loving the other person. This is why, and I'm going to step on some toes here, but I don't care. I'm leaving tomorrow. This is why if you're living with somebody who's not your spouse, you don't love them. I'm sorry, you don't. You may say you do, but love means you're committed to the other person till death do you part. How are you loving the other person if you're not committed to them? If you want to keep your options open? That's not love. You're looking for an escape hatch. Man, it's getting hot in here. You may love that shiny new thing. On the other hand, you want to be financially secure. Which heart are you going to follow? You can't follow both hearts. What are you going to do? Your heart is conflicting. You've got to pick. You've got two hearts. Sometimes you might have three hearts. Remember that old song, Torn Between Two Lovers? You can be in love with a lot of people at the same time, right? Which heart are you going to follow? C.S. Lewis was very insightful on so many things, and he certainly was insightful about this. Here's what he said about how happiness requires restraint. He said, surrender to all our desires obviously leads to impotence, disease, jealousies, lies, concealment, and everything that is the reverse of health, good humor, and frankness. For any happiness, even in this world, quite a lot of restraint is going to be necessary. You've got to restrain yourself. I don't know if you've ever seen those studies where they see if a kid can resist instant gratification. They'll bring like a 5-year-old into a room, they'll put an M&M on the table, and they'll say to the kid, you can have this M&M now, but if you wait 5 minutes and don't eat it, I'll come in and give you 10 more. And so there were 3 kinds of kids. The one kind of kid would take the M&M right away, got to have it. Boom. The next kind of kid would wait 5 minutes and get 10 more. Then there was kind of a middle kid, a kid in between, who would put his head on the table and try and like lick it, just get a little bit of it. Anyway, they did a longitudinal study. A longitudinal study takes a long time because it means they stay with the same people for decades, okay? What they found is that the kids that could delay instant gratification, the kids that could wait 5 minutes for 10 more, long term, they turned out much more successful in life than the kids who had to have it right away. If you can't put off instant gratification, I can assure you your life is going to be filled with pain and suffering. You have to be able to say no. You have to control yourself. John Mark Comer, who was a pastor in Portland, Oregon. Did you guys know there were pastors in Portland, Oregon? I didn't know this. Well, he's since moved on, and here's what he said in a book he wrote. He said, "Giving in to the desires of our flesh does not lead us to freedom in life, as many people assume, but instead to slavery. And in the worst case scenario, addiction, which is a kind of prolonged suicide by pleasure." Prolonged suicide by pleasure. Hey, let me ask you a question. If you're addicted to pornography, are you slave or are you free? You're a slave. If you're addicted to money and spending, are you a slave or are you free? If you're addicted to recognition, maybe even social media, you can't go an hour without checking it. You got to see how many likes you got. Are you a slave or are you free? You're a slave. And we think indulging the flesh is going to bring freedom. It doesn't bring freedom. It brings slavery. Or drugs or alcohol. You can think of any one of a number of things. If you're a slave to those things, you're not free. And you might be engaged in prolonged suicide by pleasure. You can't just follow your heart without restraint. And a lot of times we think we're following our heart, when in reality we're more following the culture. Tim Keller gave this example. The late Tim Keller said this. He said, "I want you to imagine a Viking 1,000 years ago, say in Norway. And he has got two conflicting desires on his heart. On one hand, he has the desire to crush people to get what he wants. On the other hand, he has same-sex attraction. Which one of those desires is he going to elevate, and which one is he going to suppress?" Well, in that culture, he's going to elevate being a tough guy because the culture applauds that. And he's going to suppress same-sex attraction because the culture doesn't like that. But take that same guy and put him in, say, Los Angeles. Today. And he's got those same two desires. He wants to crush people, same-sex attraction. Which one is he going to suppress and which one is he going to elevate? Oh, he's going to suppress that toxic masculinity. We can't have that. And he's going to elevate same-sex attraction and get all sorts of applause for it because that's what the culture supports. Is he really following his heart or is he more following the culture? He's following the culture. Oh, you're so brave for coming. No, you're not. You got it. You're brave when you go against the culture and when you do what's right. You're not brave when you just track right along with the culture. You're just doing what the culture tells you to do. The third reason we can't follow our hearts without moral restraint is our hearts are changing. Not only are our hearts corrupt and conflicting, our hearts are changing, and they're changing rapidly, especially when we're young. You may have heard that, say, a decade or two ago, gender dysphoria affected 1 out of every 10,000 men. In other words, one out of every 10,000 men thought that he was a woman. But in recent years, there's been about a 6,000% increase of young girls thinking they're boys. In fact, Abigail Shrier, who wrote the seminal book on this back in 2020 called Irreversible Damage, the Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, said in some of the girls' schools she visited, 30% of the girls were claiming to be trans. Wait, how did we go from 1 in 10,000 men to, in some environments, 3,000 and 10,000 women thinking they're the wrong sex? How do you think this happened? There's nothing new in the water. There's no genetic cause for this, no known genetic cause. What is it? It's social media. This is driven almost completely by social media. This is why Jonathan Haidt, an atheist psychologist who teaches at NYU, who wrote the book, Anxious Generation, about what social media is doing to children, says he'd never give his kid an iPhone. It's making them anxious. It's pulling them away from the truth. Oh, Frank, you don't understand. If I tried to take the iPhone away from my 13-year-old, there would be World War III. Parents? So? What's your point? Parenting's hard. If you became a parent so you could live a convenient life, I'm sorry, you chose the wrong path. Parenting is not convenient. It is hard. And if you love them more than you love peace, then you're going to figure out a way to take that thing away. Because it's making them anxious. It's pulling them away from the truth. Look, young girls are already they're uncomfortable with what's happening to their bodies. And then they go on Reddit or they go on TikTok and they have all these people telling them how wonderful it would be if they could just transition, how that's going to solve all their problems. And they believe it. They believe it. And what are we doing to counter it? Then some of them start socially transitioning. Then some of them are given medication. They're given puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and, God forbid, even surgery. I'm sure you heard of Chloe Cole, who comes from California, who had her breast cut off when she was like 13 or 15 or something. Now she's suing her doctors because she's 20 and she wants to have kids. And how did they let this happen? Why did this happen to them? Too many pastors, too many Christians have been silent. This is child abuse, ladies and gentlemen. You don't cut off perfectly healthy sex organs of a 14-year-old. Doctors who do this should be imprisoned. And we need to speak up about it, because that's what love does. Love seeks to protect innocent people. And a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old or a 15, they can't give consent. They don't know enough yet. And yet we're quiet about it. By the way, transgenderism not only does not help children who are involved in rapid onset gender dysphoria, but it's completely illogical. On one hand, these people will say there are an infinite number of genders, when in fact nature and logic shows there are only two. How does nature show there's only two? This is true of the entire mammalian world. You can only do one of two things. You can either produce an egg or a sperm. There's no third category. We know there are people that can't produce either, but that's an incapacity, not a third capacity. All you can do is produce an egg or a sperm. You're either a male or a female. There's no third gender. And by the way, just logically, if I'm a man and I think I'm a woman, I have to have some idea what a man is and some idea what a woman is to know I have gender dysphoria, to know I have a mismatch between my psychology and my biology. If I couldn't know what a man was or what a woman was, gender dysphoria conceptually would be impossible. Also, if I try and do the impossible, which is try and change my biology to go from a man to a woman, it is impossible. But if I try and do that, again, I have to have some idea what a man is and some idea what a woman is to try and make the so-called transition. If those fixed genders didn't exist, transgenderism, again, would be conceptually impossible. This is, by the way, all in the book, Correct, Not Politically Correct. And we don't want to speak truth into this. Yet we speak truth in other situations when people have mental health issues. Like an almost perfect analog to this is anorexia. An anorexic has a mismatch between their psychology and their biology. Do we ever affirm in an anorexic that their mental state is correct? Would we ever go to an anorexic and say, you know, you're right, you are way overweight, let me get you liposuction? Like, nobody would say that. We would say, honey, your mind's playing tricks on you. Let me get you some psychiatry and some food. Because you can change your mind on this. Your mind here is the problem. Your body needs nutrition, despite what your mind thinks. I mean, if your daughter said she was a mermaid, would you take her off the coast and drop her in the ocean? No, of course you wouldn't. You would say, honey, your mind's playing tricks on you. You're not a mermaid, you're a human being. But when it comes to sex, somehow we lose our minds. And we think the body is the problem. You can change your mind, you can't change your biology. I'm sorry, those are just the facts. and you ought to try and change their minds by getting them the help they need. Now, tragically, most pastors, not the great Rob McCoy, he speaks on this, but most pastors won't touch this. In fact, most Christians won't discuss this. Atheists are more articulate. In fact, Bill Maher is more articulate on this. You know who Bill Maher is? Years ago, I was on his program. He was on ABC called Politically Incorrect. Now he's on HBO. I don't have HBO, but I see his clips on YouTube. About 2 years ago, he had this show called Along for the Pride, where he pointed out that the older generations, my generation and older, we hardly identify at all as LGBTQ, but the younger generations do. And he said, at this pace, by 2060, we'll all be gay. What's he pointing out? He's pointing out that this is a social contagion. There's nothing new in the water, and kids go through phases. We all know, we all went through phases, right? I mean, Maher said when he was a kid, he wanted to be a pirate. He said, thank God nobody took me seriously and took me for eye removal and peg leg surgery. And if everybody knew what they wanted to be when they were 8, the world would be filled with cowboys and princesses, but it's not. Because kids go through phases. Things change, and they change quickly. In fact, you ever notice that as you grow up, your mind changes about a lot of things, and you even look back at your younger self with some sort of disdain, right? In fact, like, you might say, if you hit 15, you're 15 years old, you might look back at your 10-year-old self and go, when I was 10, I was kind of an idiot, right? And then you hit 20, and you look back at your 15-year-old self and you go, when I was 15, I was an idiot. And then you hit 30, and you look back at your 20-year-old self and you go, when I was 20, I was an idiot. Do you know what this means? No matter how old you are now, you're an idiot. Because you're always going to look back at your younger self and say, I don't have this all together. Now, thankfully, this slows down. I'm 63 now. I don't look back at my 53-year-old self and go, I was an idiot when I was 53. Because the older you get, hopefully you've got a solid direction and you're not changing as quickly. But when you're young, things change quickly. In fact, the data show that these young people that have this gender dysphoria, 80% of them grow out of it by the time they're 18, and 96% of them grow out of it by the time they're 26, when their brains are fully developed. Why would you ever mutilate a child? To try and fix a problem that's going to fix itself naturally anyway with just a little passage of time. In fact, do you know what puberty is? It's one big, long transition. That's what it is. It's normal to feel odd when you're going through puberty. It is normal to feel odd when you're going through puberty. And to say that, I've got to get all these hormones to fix it. No. You just need to let nature take its course. Thomas Sowell, by the way, who says everything well, said this. He's now 94 years old. Here's what Sowell said. Ours may become the first civilization destroyed not by the power of our enemies, but by the ignorance of our teachers and the dangerous nonsense they are teaching our children. An age of artificial intelligence, they are creating artificial stupidity. Now, there are good teachers out there, don't get me wrong, but there are many that are buying into this nonsense. It's not logical. Nature does not show this, and it hurts people. And we need to stand against it. And you know why a lot of people don't stand against it? They think love means approval. That if you're going to love somebody, you need to approve what they do. Does love mean approval? Every parent knows that's not the case. How many parents do we have in here? All right, how many former children do we have in here? Okay, good. That's all of us. Question. If your parents approved of everything that you wanted to do when you were 13, would your parents have been loving? No, you can't approve of everything a 13-year-old wants to do. If you do, you're not loving. You're enabling them to do evil. You're not helping them. You're hurting them. They need somebody to say no. If the kid doesn't hear no a lot in his or her life, that kid's going to wind up in trouble. Because our hearts are corrupt. Our hearts want to do our own thing. I mean, you let your 13-year-old, the kid's going to dine on Skittles all day. Never go to bed, play video games. I mean, you can't allow this to go on. Be the adult. You know, in the passage that everybody reads at their wedding, but nobody obeys, 1 Corinthians 13, who had that read at their wedding? Have you ever really read it? Does Paul say love means approval? No, here's what he says. Love always protects. Love does not delight in evil. Love rejoices in the truth. Love always perseveres. If you want to love somebody, you need to protect them by telling them the truth. Jesus said, I give you one new command. What's the one new command? Love one another as I have loved you. How did he love us? He sacrificed himself for us. But too often, we don't sacrifice ourselves for other people. We sacrifice them for us. In fact, Thomas Sowell, again, put this so well. He said, when you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. Why do we tell people what they want to hear rather than what they need to hear? Because we're trying to protect ourselves. We don't want them getting mad at us. And so we tell them what they want. Oh, I'm for you. Whatever you want to do. Yeah, just go right ahead. When we tell them what they need to hear, we're sacrificing ourselves to help them. And that's what we need to do. So, should you follow your heart? Not without moral restraint, because our hearts are corrupt, our hearts are conflicting, and our hearts are changing. So let's recite this together so we all have it. Are you guys ready? Here we go. Above all else, guard your heart, because everything you do flows from it. Now, last thing. You're probably thinking, okay, fine, we're not supposed to follow our hearts, so how are we supposed to find hope and identity? How are we supposed to find it? You know, our culture believes that you have to achieve your identity. Man, if you got to achieve your identity, all the pressure's on you, and there's always somebody that can do it better. I mean, you're supposed to put your identity in your sexual preference, or your job, or your bank account, or another person even. Ladies and gentlemen, do you know how fragile those identities are? Let's suppose you put your identity in your sexual preference. What happens when you can no longer sexually perform, or you're no longer sexually preferred? You no longer have an identity? Or what happens when you put your identity in your job? What happens when you lose your job or you're retired? You no longer have an identity? Or you put your identity in a good thing like another person, but God forbid that other person dies or leaves you. You no longer have an identity? No, those identities are fleeting. They're fragile. And in Christianity, you don't achieve your identity. Stop trying to achieve your identity. In Christianity, you receive your identity. It's free. It's already given to you if you accept it. It's not in what you do, it's in what he's done. By receiving what he's done, you become an heir to the throne forever, and you can't lose this identity when you become a Christian. In fact, John, who wrote a biography that we call a gospel of Jesus, said this in the very first chapter. He said, "Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." Your eternal identity is waiting for you if you haven't accepted it yet. You just need to turn, change your mind, and welcome the Lord into your life. You receive him. You don't achieve it. You receive it. And you have it forever. We can look at it another way. Do you realize that everyone you love will die? Everything you build will crumble. Everything you say will be forgotten. Everything you do will come to nothing. You and your identity will die and vanish. Unless the resurrection is true. If the resurrection is true, then what happens here matters. If it's not true, it doesn't. Thankfully, the resurrection is true. And do you realize that everyone's going to be resurrected and everyone's going to have eternal life? The only question is where you're going to spend it. Either with Jesus or separated from him. C.S. Lewis famously said there's only two kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says, thy will be done. Has everyone in here received your identity in Christ? Good. Now, if you want to go further, I brought some books, and I want to point out that all the proceeds from the sale of the books is going to feed needy children. Mine. Okay? Just so you know. Got 3 sons, so I need some help. We got grandkids now, actually. Anyway, I want to send you this PowerPoint presentation and about a dozen others in a PDF format. Follow that QR code, and I'm going to send you this presentation and a dozen others. If that QR code doesn't work, you can get to the same place by just texting the word evidence. And by the way, the people watching out there, why are you not here? Are you still in your pajamas? The people watching live online can get it too. Just text the word evidence to 855-909-0582. 855-909-0582. Now, I mentioned the book that we've talked about here is Correct, Not Politically Correct. There's some copies out there about that. By the way, there's only one Bible verse in that book. You know what it is? Above all else, guard your heart because everything you do flows from it. This is not the Christian case against same-sex marriage and transgenderism. This is the natural law, common sense, medical reason why same-sex marriage and transgenderism are not good for individuals and they're not good for a society. You can give that book to an open-minded unbeliever, okay? This book down here, Hollywood Heroes, How Your Favorite Movies Reveal God. Garrett likes the book because he's in Hollywood, and we talked about it yesterday on the podcast. We know there's a lot of garbage that comes out of Hollywood, but you might be shocked to learn that all of the most successful movie franchises of the past 50 years have all stolen from the greatest story ever told, the story of Jesus. Whether we're talking about Captain America, Iron Man, Batman, Wonder Woman, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Harry Potter. Harry Potter? You would be shocked to learn that J.K. Rowling took the story right out of the Bible and she admits it. Because all of these heroes that you see in these films, what they all do is they all sacrifice themselves to save people from evil. And the ultimate hero, as the final chapter of the book reveals, is Jesus himself. Nobody gets all the way there. Jesus is the ultimate hero. But what resonates with people is someone who will sacrifice themselves to save other people. Follow your heart doesn't resonate with people. Yeah, Hollywood makes movies about following your heart, but not these kind of movies. I mean, can you imagine? How many people in here saw Endgame? Spoiler alert. If you haven't seen Endgame yet, I'm sorry, it's 6 years old, okay? But in Endgame, Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr., who is really Iron Man, has to take on with his Avenger buddies Thanos, the Satan figure, who wants to kill like all the population in the world. And he takes him on, and ultimately, Tony Stark sacrifices himself to save the world. He's the Jesus figure, okay? Now imagine if the scene went like this. Tony Stark sees Thanos, and he goes, guys, I'm not feeling it today. I'm just not feeling it. I don't want to take this guy on. I want to follow my heart and do what's right for just me. I'm out. Would that be an inspiring ending? Would anybody go, love the movie? No, you'd go, he chickened out. That's awful. It's when people sacrifice. Does that inspire people? Those are the ultimate heroes. Also, the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, that argues from the ground up that Christianity's true. We go to a lot of colleges and present that. In fact, this Wednesday, Lord willing, we'll be at Wayne State University in Michigan, Detroit, Michigan. You know, Detroit's a good place to be from. Anyway, we're going to Detroit, and so pray that goes well. We present a lot of evidence, and then we take questions from the college campus audience. And so this is all live streamed. You can see it on our YouTube channel. And a lot of people say, Frank, the book's too long. It's over 400 pages. Can you write something shorter? Yeah, we wrote a comic book. There it is. It's basically I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist in a comic book. So hopefully you guys can handle that. All right, last thing before we go to questions. Some of you may go, I've got family members who don't believe any of what you're saying, Frank. What can I do? Well, first of all, here's a question you can ask somebody who you love, who is going down the wrong road. Ask this question. If you thought I was going down a road that would hurt me or hurt others, would you love me enough to tell me? What do you think they're going to say? Well, of course I would. Thank you. Can I do that for you now? Ask them that. And then if you communicate to them in a loving way and they still reject you, okay, you tried. You just leave the results to God. You can also ask them this question. This is a question I ask a lot on college campuses. People who are not Christians. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had many atheists stand at the microphone and say, no. Wait, I thought you claimed to be reasonable. I thought you claimed to be rational. How is it you wouldn't believe something that was true? Because it's not a matter of reason. It's not a head problem. It's a heart problem. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. Why? Because they want to be God over their own lives. They're not on a truth quest. They're on a happiness quest. And they're just going to believe whatever they think is going to make them happy. Here's the problem. You can make yourself happy over the short term, doing a lot of fun, but ultimately sinful and selfish things. Yet over the long term, it's a disaster. And everyone in here is over 40 years old, knows what I'm talking about, because many of us have tried it ourselves, right? I'm going to live for me. I'm going to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, with whom I want to do it. No, you're not. Not very long anyway. Who's going to put up with that? What kind of relationships are you going to have if you become a me monster? It's all about you all the time. I can tell you what's going to happen. You're going to wind up divorced, addicted, broken, alone, and probably prematurely dead. Because you just can't follow every whim. You can't follow every impulse. You can't just follow your heart without reason and without moral restraint.